Hey guys, tonight we're wandering somewhere you've probably never imagined visiting in your mind before. A pale pink dawn along the muddy banks of the Euphrates about 5,000 years ago. The air smells like wet clay and sheep, a strangely comforting mix if you ignore the occasional whiff of something less identifiable. Merchants are stirring, adjusting awnings over stalls made from palm trunks and woven reed mats. It's not exactly a farmer's market in Brooklyn, but there's definitely a vibe. Except here, you probably won't survive this without catching something from the river.so. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through loose dust that sticks to your sandals, feeling the coolness fade as the sun edges higher. To your left, two men haul wicker baskets full of dates, their backs bent like the old tamarisk trees along the river. Somewhere ahead, a donkey brays, a sound you will hear a lot here, and the creak of wooden cart wheels blends with the slap of water against mud banks. You stop for a moment and watch a pair of merchants setting up their stall, reed mats spread out, clay bowls stacked, and bundles of onions laid in rows like little soldiers. It's a scene of simple commerce, but beneath it, something bigger is brewing. You notice one man holding a lump of wet clay, thumb working it into a flat oval. He sets it aside like it's nothing, but that's the seed of our story, the thing that will become a receipt. For now, though, it's just mud in a man's hand. And yet, even in this ordinary morning, you can feel the faint tension of people needing to remember who gave what to whom. Barter works fine when everyone's honest. But in a crowd of traders, farmers, and herders, honesty has to be encouraged. One woman across the way sells fish still twitching, wrapped in wet reeds. She's already haggling with a customer, both talking fast. She takes his barley, but before she hands over the fish, she glances toward a scribe lounging in the shade of a palm. The scribe has a small clay tablet ready and a reed stylus in hand, bored expression set in place. He scratches quick lines into the clay and sets it in the sun to dry. There's no ceremony, no congratulations. You now have proof of purchase, but that's exactly what just happened. And the truth is, receipts here are more than paper trails. Obviously, because paper hasn't been invented yet. There, trust in physical form, hardened into clay. You can almost hear the mental gears of this early city turning. How do we keep track of goats, grain, and beer without letting the liars win? Somewhere down the street, two boys push each other over. A pile of dates, their mother yelling in a voice that could shatter pottery. A priest glides past in spotless white linen, ignoring them completely. In his hand, he carries his own clay tablet, probably a list of offerings brought to the temple. Temples here are not just for prayers, they're economic hubs, pulling in goods like the river pulls in silt. If you could peek inside, you'd see storerooms stacked with jars of oil, baskets of grain, and racks of dried fish. All of it tallied, all of it remembered, in clay that it's easy to forget that for the Sumerians, memory wasn't just about stories, it was infrastructure. People lived and died on whether someone could prove a trade was fair, a tax was paid, or a debt settled. You think of it as bureaucracy now, but here it's survival. The scribe in the shade knows this. His stylus taps the clay almost like a drummer keeping a beat, and every mark he makes is another piece in the invisible web that keeps this market from dissolving into chaos. Historians still argue whether the very first receipts were purely economic or if they had ritual importance, maybe even magical power to bind a deal. Some point to inscriptions that seem more like blessings than item lists. But whatever the origin, you can see how a simple piece of clay could save someone's livelihood. Without it, a merchant could claim you never paid. With it, you can look him in the eye and say, "Check the tablet." You wander closer to the riverbank. The water is brown and slow, flecked with drifting straw. Somewhere upstream, more boats are coming, flat-bottomed with high prows painted in simple patterns. They're piled with goods, and you imagine each bundle will have to be accounted for, each one a future receipt in the making. Even the act of unloading is a negotiation, with shouting, counting, and the occasional exaggerated gesture toward the temple quarter. You lean on a post and watch a merchant from far upriver pull something from his satchel. A small, baked tablet, about the size of your palm, covered in neat rows of wedge-shaped marks. He hands it to a local trader, who studies it, nods, and claps him on the shoulder. Deal confirmed. No trust fall needed, just trust baked into clay. A breeze stirs the edge of your tunic, and the smell of baking bread drifts down the street. Somewhere, another scribe is drying a fresh tablet in the sun, not knowing that thousands of years later, you'd be standing here in your mind, marveling at the humble birth of the receipt. And as the light sharpens on the Euphrates, you feel the rhythm of the market settle into its day. Buy, sell, record, repeat. The clay is everywhere, and with it, the promise that people will remember. You drift further along the market street, where the smell of sheep mingles with the faint tang of smoke from cooking fires. A wiry herder shuffles past, dust clinging to his legs up to the knee. His eyes dart over his flock. 10, 12, 15 goats. Wait, was it 15 this morning, or 16? He mutters under his breath, squints, and then frowns like he's trying to pull the number out of his own skull. You can almost hear the mental math, but the goats are not cooperating. One bleats, another tugs free of the rope, and two are already nose deep in a date seller's basket. You step aside as he lunges after them, but it's clear this man has a problem bigger than goats with attitude. Without some way to keep count, he's at the mercy of memory, and memory gets slippery after a long day under the Sumerian sun. It's the same for everyone here, whether you're a farmer with grain, a brewer with jars of beer, or a potter with stacks of bowls. You need to remember what went out and what came back. And unlike the world you live in, there's no check the spreadsheet option. The herder finally gathers his animals, tying them in a ragged cluster. He glances around for someone, anyone, who might help him keep track. There's no official lost goat prevention desk, but there are scribes, and a few have started offering their skills for a small fee. It's not altruism, it's a service, and like all services, it has a price. You can picture it, a scribe pressing symbols for goat and 15 into clay, then sealing it with his personal mark. That lump of clay becomes proof. This man left with 15 goats, so he'd better come back with 15 goats, or be ready to explain why. Historians still argue whether this sort of tally came first from necessity or whether it evolved out of temple inventory practices. Was the market imitating religion, or did religion just formalize what the market had already figured out? Either way, you can see the seeds of a system sprouting here, in the morning sun, with one frustrated herder that a young boy wanders past carrying a pouch that jingles. Not coins, because coins don't exist yet, but clay tokens. Some are shaped like little cones, others like spheres or discs. Each shape means something. A cone might be a measure of grain, a disc might be a sheep. The boy's job is to deliver these to a scribe, who will press them into a flat piece of clay, record the numbers, and seal the whole thing. It's basically a proto-receipt, but more tactile, more feel it in your hand than a modern printed slip. You pause to watch a merchant lean over a low table, his hands dusty from handling jars. He's explaining to a customer, half patiently, half annoyed, that she took 3 jars yesterday and only paid for 2. She insists she paid for all 3. Their voices rise, heads turn, and suddenly, the scribe down the row is waving them over. He reaches under his mat and pulls out a small tablet, baked hard and stamped with the merchant's seal. The marks clearly show 2 jars paid, 1 jar owed. It's not a matter of opinion anymore. The clay has spoken. The woman sighs, fishes out more barley, and the matter ends without further drama. You smile to yourself. This is the magic of a receipt in action, not magic like incantations and smoke, but magic in the way it cuts through human fuzziness and forgetfulness. No goat counting headaches. No, he said, she said about jars of beer. The clay remembers. The herder from earlier wanders back into view, this time with a scribe in tow. They're both squinting in the sun, the scribe holding a lump of clay like it's more precious than gold. You watch as the herder counts out each goat, the scribe pressing a stylus into the clay after every number. The goats are unimpressed, chewing on whatever they can find, but the herder's shoulders relax with each mark. When they're done, the scribe rolls a little carved cylinder across the wet surface, leaving a repeating pattern of animals and plants. It's an official seal, a signature that says, "Yes, I wrote this. Yes, it's correct." A breeze carries the scent of baking bread from somewhere nearby, and the sound of the river drifts faintly over the noise of the market. This place hums with life, but beneath that hum, you can sense the quiet rhythm of record-keeping beginning to take shape. It's not glamorous. Nobody's getting rich from a single goat tally. But for people who live in a world without backups, every mark in clay is a little insurance policy. Quirky side note: some of the earliest clay tokens we've found look suspiciously like candy drops, which has led to more than one archaeologist joking about prehistoric Skittles. Whether anyone actually tried to eat them is unknown, but you can imagine a bored apprentice sneaking one into his mouth and instantly regretting it. As you step away from the goat drama, you catch sight of the boy with the token pouch again. He's headed toward the temple district, his pace quick. The scribes there are the real heavyweights, handling shipments that could feed 100 people for a month. But it all starts the same way. One person, one count, one lump of clay to remember it by. The sun climbs higher, shadows shrink, and the smell of the river gets stronger. Around you, the market keeps its slow, relentless beat. Goods change hands. Voices rise and fall. Scribes keep marking, sealing, and stacking their tablets. The herder, now holding his goat receipt, walks off toward the open plain. And you can almost hear him thinking that, for once, he knows exactly what he's coming home with. You wander past the stalls toward a shaded corner where the air feels a little cooler, the ground still damp from last night's river mist. Here, a man sits cross-legged with a low basket beside him, filled not with dates or onions, but with a jumble of small, oddly shaped clay objects. They're about the size of your thumb, some flattened like lentils, others shaped like tiny cones, spheres, or even little ovals with ridges. You realize you've found one of the earliest hacks in human memory, the clay token trick. The man's hands are quick and practiced. He plucks a cone-shaped token from the basket, presses it into a flat pad of soft clay, then lifts it away, leaving a neat little impression. He repeats the motion with a sphere, then another cone, then something that looks like a mini loaf of bread. Each shape stands for a particular thing. A cone might mean a measure of barley. A sphere might mean a jar of oil. A loaf shape could be bread rations. It's basically an ancient pictogram language, except you can hold the words in your palm. You lean in, feeling the rough texture of the tokens under your fingertips. They're unglazed, sun-dried, and still faintly warm from the morning heat. Each one is like a promise, something you've given or received, pressed into memory before the day has time to blur it. And the best part? They don't need literacy in the way you think of it. Even someone who can't read cuneiform can match. A cone to a cone, a sphere to a sphere. Historians still argue whether these tokens started as independent tallies or if they were always meant to be pressed into tablets. Some say they were kept loose in little clay envelopes, sealed shut until needed. Imagine a merchant handing you a clay ball the size of an orange, telling you, "Your order is in here. Break it open later," and inside are the tokens, physical, proof of the deal. Others think the pressing of tokens into a tablet came first, with loose tokens as just a storage convenience. Either way, the idea is elegant. Physical shapes to store numbers and categories, in a world where numbers and categories could mean survival. Across from the token maker, a merchant is busy negotiating with a woman for grain. They've agreed on the amount, but instead of handing over the goods immediately, he takes a handful of cone tokens from his pouch, drops them into her hand, and nods. She tucks them into her sash without counting. She doesn't have to. The shapes are their own guarantee. Later, she'll take them to a storage yard, press them into a tablet, and exchange that clay proof for her actual barley. You can almost hear the hum of a system forming. Slow, clunky, but functional. There's a fringe detail here that makes you grin. Some recovered tokens are decorated with tiny patterns, spirals, or cross-hatching that don't seem to serve any accounting purpose. Were they just doodles? Or were they meant to make counterfeiting harder? Maybe they were the ancient Sumerian version of fancy embossed paper. A boy, probably an apprentice, kneels beside the token maker, rolling fresh shapes from soft clay. His fingers are quick but messy, and one cone ends up looking more like a bent carrot. The older man sighs, tosses it back into the scrap pile, and mutters something under his breath that sounds like, "Try again." Even in ancient Mesopotamia, interns get the grunt work. You settle back on your heels, watching a transaction unfold. A river trader approaches, his tunic streaked with dried mud from unloading his boat. He dumps a bundle of dried fish onto the mat, and the token maker counts out matching sphere shapes, pressing each into the trader's waiting slab of clay. When the slab is full, the token maker rolls a carved cylinder seal across it, leaving a repeating pattern of lions and reeds. This isn't just decoration. It's a signature, a way to prove who made the record. The trader nods in satisfaction and heads off toward the temple district, clay tablet under his arm like a prized loaf of bread. The market noise swells and fades like the tide, shouts in one direction, laughter in another, the rhythmic slap of wet clay on reed mats as more tokens are made. The air smells of fish, onions, and the faint mineral tang of drying clay. You're struck by how much of this system depends not just on the tokens themselves, but on the trust people put into them. These are lumps of dirt, after all. The magic is in the shared agreement. Cone equals barley, sphere equals oil, no substitutions. A quirky thought crosses your mind. What if someone invented a new shape? Would it be accepted or laughed out of the market? The token maker across from you probably knows the answer, and he's not looking eager to expand the repertoire. Standardization is key here, because the moment shapes lose their meaning, the whole system collapses. You step back, letting another customer take your place. He's a young man with nervous hands, holding a pouch that jingles faintly with clay. The token maker greets him with a nod, and they begin the familiar ritual. Select shape, press into clay, seal, exchange nods. In a few minutes, the deal is done, and the young man disappears into the crowd, his clay slab already stiffening in the sun. As you walk away, you glance back at the little basket of tokens, their shapes catching the light. They're simple, almost laughably so, and yet they carry the weight of trade, trust, and daily life. And somewhere in the future, when people are paying for coffee with contactless cards, the ghost of a Sumerian cone token might still be smiling in the background. You leave the hum of the market behind and step into a quieter street. The air suddenly cooler as the sun disappears behind taller mud brick walls. The sound changes, too. Less shouting, more muffled footsteps on packed earth. At the end of the lane rises a temple, its base broad and square, built of sun-baked bricks stacked in layers so precise they seem to hum with order. A sloping ramp leads you upward, and as you climb, you catch the faint scent of incense drifting down from the open doorway. Inside, the temperature drops again. It's dim, lit by narrow slits in the walls where sunlight slices through in dusty beams. The floor is swept clean, the air thick with the warm resin smell of burning frankincense. This isn't just a place for prayers, it's an administrative machine, the beating bureaucratic heart of the city. The temple is both sacred and practical, a combination the Sumerians pull off without irony. Along one wall, low benches are set with flat baskets holding clay tablets in various states, some soft and freshly marked, others dry and stacked like ancient bricks. You approach a scribe seated on a reed mat, stylus in hand. He's not dressed like the priests, but he's no mere market clerk either. His job is to record offerings brought to the temple, grain, oil, sheep, everything the gods are given, but which the temple staff then distributes to workers, priests, and even the needy. Every transaction is carefully recorded. Here, a receipt isn't just proof of payment. It's a divine record, a tally made in the presence of the gods. You watch as a man kneels before the scribe, setting down a basket of onions and a small jar of oil. The scribe counts them, then begins pressing marks into the clay, one sign for onion, one for jar, another for the number. The symbols are precise, almost elegant, the strokes made with the same care as someone writing a sacred text. When he's done, he takes a small carved cylinder from a pouch at his belt and rolls it across the bottom of the tablet. The impression, it leaves, spirals, animals, geometric designs, is his seal, his signature, the guarantee that this record will stand. Historians still argue whether temple receipts were primarily religious offerings recorded for piety's sake, or if they were simply a practical extension of the temple's role as central warehouse. Some scholars believe the receipts doubled as a kind of spiritual insurance, proof not just that you paid your dues, but that the gods themselves had taken note. If so, that makes these the earliest form of receipts with both earthly and cosmic consequences. You edge deeper into the temple and pass a doorway that leads into a storeroom. The air is cool and smells faintly of grain dust. Shelves and reed racks line the walls, stacked with jars sealed with lumps of clay stamped by cylinder seals. Some seals show animals, others abstract patterns. Each one is like a lock, break the clay, and you break the proof that the contents are untampered. You run your fingers over one jar's seal, feeling the crisp ridges of the carving. Even without understanding the symbols, you can sense the authority in them. A priest glides past, murmuring a greeting. He carries a tablet of his own, larger and heavier than the ones you've seen in the market. This one is filled edge to edge with neat wedge-shaped marks, the kind of writing that's almost hypnotic to look at. He pauses to speak with a younger priest, their voices low, occasionally gesturing toward a pile of sealed jars in the corner. You wonder if they're debating an offering's authenticity or just trying to remember whose turn it is to do inventory. There's a quirky little scene in the far corner. A pair of temple workers using an ancient receipt in an unexpected way. One of them is holding a tablet like a fan, waving it to cool himself in the stuffy room. The other laughs, shakes his head, and takes it from him, carefully placing it back on the shelf. Proof of divine offerings is not, apparently, to be used as air conditioning. You move back into the main hall, where another scribe is working. This one's table holds a shallow dish of water to keep his clay moist, and next to it, a pile of tokens. Yes, the same shapes you saw in the market. The temple hasn't abandoned the token system entirely. They just use it alongside the tablets. When a big offering arrives, the scribe will record it on clay, roll the seal, and sometimes place matching tokens in a sealed envelope to go with it. Double security, ancient style. The hum of the temple is different from the market's chatter. Here, voices are low, movements deliberate. Every mark in clay is permanent. Well, as permanent as baked earth can be. A mistake can't be erased without starting over, so the scribes are cautious, careful. You think about how many of these tablets will survive for thousands of years, long after the people who made them are dust. From outside, you hear the faint splash of water and the distant bray of a donkey. The temple walls muffle most of the sound, making it feel like you're wrapped in a different world, slower, heavier, more deliberate. You watch one more offering recorded, a small cage of live birds, feathers ruffling in the dim light. The scribe records them with the same precision he gave to the onions earlier. Gods, after all, are believed to care about details. As you leave the temple, stepping back into the glare of the street, you feel the contrast hit you. The noisy sprawl of the market against the measured hum of the temple. Yet both worlds rely on the same thing, a mark in clay that says, "This happened." Whether for the gods or for the goat herder, the receipt has already begun to weave itself into daily life. You wander toward the southern edge of the market, where the street narrows between mud brick walls streaked with the marks of long-gone rains. The noise here shifts, less bartering, more quiet, careful movements. A man in a long, sleeveless tunic stands at a low bench, rolling a cylinder across a wet clay tablet. The pattern it leaves is hypnotic. Tiny lions in procession, palm trees bending in an invisible breeze, geometric borders framing it all. You found the world of cylinders and seals. This is where receipts become more than just numbers and words. They become identity. The cylinder seal is the ancient Sumerian equivalent of a signature, except instead of scribbling your name, you carry a small carved stone or baked clay roller that leaves your personal mark. Every roll is a statement. I made this, I approve. This, I own this. The man picks up the seal again, turning it in his fingers. It's no longer than your thumb, drilled through the middle so it can be worn on a cord around the neck. He dips it in water, aligns it carefully, and rolls it once. More across the soft clay. The grooves and ridges catch the light, crisp and deep. There's artistry here, as much as there is practicality. A well-carved seal not only proves authenticity, it also shows off your taste, your wealth, maybe even your sense of humor. Historians still argue whether seals started as purely functional tools or if they emerged first as status symbols. Did merchants adopt them from elites, or did priests copy the merchants? No one's certain. What is clear is that by this time, they're everywhere, from temple storerooms to beer halls to goat pens. Without a seal, your tablet is just a lump of marked clay. With one, it's enforceable proof. You watch a transaction unfold. A merchant delivers a basket of dates to a warehouse clerk. The clerk counts them, then fetches a pre-prepared tablet. He writes in the amount, rolls his own seal along the bottom, then passes the tablet to the merchant. But the merchant isn't done. He takes his own seal and rolls it across the back. Now both parties have signed off, so to speak, and the deal is locked in from both ends. There's a quirky side to all this. Some seals feature playful scenes, tiny mythological creatures wrestling, or a goat standing on its hind legs playing. A lyre. One particularly odd seal you glimpse on the bench shows a lion drinking beer through a straw, which might be a joke, a metaphor, or just an ancient artisan amusing himself. Either way, it proves that even in the seriousness of commerce, humor sneaks in. A young apprentice approaches, holding a pouch. He carefully tips out half a dozen seals onto the table for inspection. Each one is unique, one of polished stone, another of clay painted with bright mineral pigments. The master sealmaker picks one up, squints at the carving, and shakes his head. Too shallow, he mutters. It won't hold the pattern after a few uses. He hands it back and selects another, running his fingertip along the edge with approval. You think about how personal these seals are. Lose yours, and someone could impersonate you. Some merchants wear theirs tucked into a small leather pouch tied under their clothes. Others display them openly as a sign of legitimacy. In a way, they're like carrying your wallet and passport. In one tiny, rollable package, a clerk beckons you closer to show off his latest tablet. The clay is still damp, the seal impressions sharp and clean. He points to the repeating figures and explains, slowly, so you can follow, that this particular seal has been in his family for 2 generations. His father used it when selling sheep, and now he uses it to manage grain transactions. In this city, lineage and reputation are as much a part of the deal as the goods themselves. From somewhere beyond the wall, you hear the soft splash of water in an irrigation canal. The air smells faintly of wet earth mixed with the mineral scent of fresh clay. The sealmaker dips his carving tool into a jar of oil, then begins working on a new piece. He chips away tiny curls of stone, muttering under his breath as he shapes a miniature bull into the surface. Watching him, you realize this is a skill passed down like a secret recipe. Part craftsmanship, part trust. As you turn to leave, you see one more interaction. A young merchant receiving his first seal. It's plain compared to the ornate ones you've seen, but the pride in his face is unmistakable. He rolls it once across a practice tablet, studies the pattern, and nods. From now on, every deal he makes will bear his mark. And thousands of years later, if that seal survives, someone might roll it across fresh clay and see exactly what you're seeing now. You follow a dusty lane that curves away from the market and toward a row of low storage sheds. The smell hits you before you get there, dry, nutty, with a faint sweetness. Barley, piles of it, sacks stacked chest high, tied at the neck with twisted reed cord, leaning against the mud brick walls like an army waiting for orders. The man in a faded tunic stands at the entrance, one hand resting on a clay tablet. He's the foreman, and his job is to pay his crew not in silver or copper. Those are still rare luxuries, but in sacks of barley. You watch as a group of laborers approaches, their faces glistening with sweat from the fields. They've been hauling mud for brick making all morning, and now it's payday, Sumerian style. The foreman waves over a scribe, who sits cross-legged with a fresh lump of clay balanced on a board. The scribe writes quickly, a sign for barley, a number, and sometimes a mark to note the worker's role. Once the marks are in place, the foreman presses his own cylinder seal into the clay, then gestures to the pile of sacks. One by one, workers collect their rations, some hoisting them onto their shoulders, others dragging them across the dust. Historians still argue whether these barley wages were standardized citywide or if each foreman could set his own rates. Some surviving tablets suggest strict uniformity, so many liters for a day's work, while others hint at variation depending on the job or the season. Either way, the receipt system kept everyone accountable. The clay wasn't just a tally, it was leverage. If a worker came back claiming he'd been shorted, the tablet would have the final say. You spot a younger worker lingering at the edge, shifting from foot to foot. When it's his turn, the foreman frowns and flips through a small stack of older tablets before nodding reluctantly. The scribe writes out the barley amount, smaller than the others, and hands it over. The young man doesn't argue. He knows the clay record is right there, probably noting that he missed part of the week. There's a quirky moment when one sack tears open, spilling golden grains into the dust. A couple of boys dart forward to scoop it up, only to be shooed away by the foreman. He waves over another laborer to patch the sack with a scrap of woven reed. You can tell this isn't just about thrift. Barley is currency here, and wasting it is like letting coins roll into the gutter. Near the shed, a small table holds the foreman's ledger, a stack of older tablets, some cracked at the edges but still legible. He runs his hand over them like a banker counting bills. You realize this isn't just today's payroll. This is months of proof, every payment etched and sealed. If the temple or city officials ever questioned his accounts, he could point to this neat stack of hardened clay and say, "Here's the record." A merchant wanders up with a sealed jar of oil, clearly here to trade. They haggle quietly while the scribe works on another tablet. Eventually, the deal is struck, oil in exchange for a portion of barley. The scribe records the transaction and hands each man a matching receipt tablet. Two parties, two pieces of proof, just enough to keep anyone honest. From the shade of the shed, you watch a laborer tear off a small pinch of barley and pop it into his mouth. It's raw, gritty, and probably not pleasant, but you guess he's just too hungry to wait. A woman nearby laughs and hands him a piece of flatbread to go with it. For a moment, the exchange feels almost modern, people teasing each other at payday, the casual camaraderie of a shared grind. You notice that some of the sacks are marked with a clay tag tied to the cord. Each tag has a seal impression, sometimes with an added wedge mark to indicate weight or owner. These tags are like mobile receipts, proof that this specific sack belongs to someone, even if it gets moved halfway across the city. Lose the tag, and you might lose your grain. The scribe pauses to wet his stylus in a little jar, the clay glistening as he presses the next mark. He's focused, careful, knowing each line will harden into permanence by the end of the day. Outside, the wind picks up, carrying a swirl of barley dust, and the sound of distant hammers from the brickworks. By the time the last worker collects his ration, the sun is leaning west. The foreman stacks the remaining tablets in a wooden tray, covers them with a reed mat, and locks the shed door with a loop of twisted fiber. The barley inside is worth as much as any coin vault in later centuries. And out here, in the dust and the heat, you've just seen why receipts are more than bureaucracy. They're the bones of trust in a city that runs on grain. The air turns warmer and heavier as you drift back toward the center of the city, the smell of river mud mixing with that of sun-baked clay. You pass under a reed arch into a courtyard, and your eyes widen. Every surface is covered in tablets. They're stacked on shelves, leaned in neat rows against the walls, piled in reed baskets. It's like stepping into a mud brick library where every book weighs a pound and smells faintly of wet earth. This is the storeroom of the city's bureaucracy, the final resting place for hundreds, maybe thousands, of receipts. Here, the clay doesn't just keep memory alive for a day or a week, it preserves it for years. Each tablet is a frozen moment, a goat sold, a barley payment made, a jar of oil delivered to the temple kitchens. The air feels still, almost reverent, as if the room itself is aware of the weight of what it holds. That a clerk moves slowly along one wall, humming under his breath, running his fingers over tablet edges as if reading by touch. He stops, pulls one out, and sets it on a low table. It's slightly warped from drying too quickly in the sun, but the marks are still sharp. A list of sheep, the owner's seal, the date. He compares it with another tablet, tilting his head like he's matching puzzle pieces. Historians still argue whether rooms like this were purely for storage or if they doubled as active offices where records were cross-checked daily. Some evidence suggests scribes came here to audit transactions, comparing receipts issued in the market with the master tablets held by the city. Others think they were more like archives, visited only when a dispute arose. Either way, the sheer volume of clay here is overwhelming. You step closer to a shelf stacked with tablets arranged by size. Smaller ones, barely the size of your palm, sit in the top rows. Larger slabs, some as big as cutting boards, fill the bottom. You wonder what kind of transaction needed that much space. Probably a shipment large enough to feed an entire district. One tablet catches your eye. Along its edges are tiny, shallow scratches, clearly not part of the cuneiform. The clerk sees you staring and grins. "Bored apprentice," he says with a shrug. Apparently, even in ancient Mesopotamia, there's always someone doodling on the paperwork. In one corner, a reed basket holds broken tablets. A few pieces have been reassembled and tied together with thin cord, evidence of someone taking the time to preserve even damaged records. It's oddly touching, the idea that a cracked receipt is still worth keeping. Beside the basket, a low shelf holds small lumps of clay with seal impressions, but no writing. Probably tags for sacks or jars that have long since been emptied. A scribe in a pale linen robe kneels at a desk in the middle of the room, working on what looks like a catalog. Tablet. His marks are deliberate, evenly spaced, each line followed by a small wedge that might indicate location. He pauses to rub his neck, then leans back and blows gently on the clay to help it set. This is a different kind of work than the bustling market scribes. It's slower, more methodical. The kind of job that requires a steady hand and an iron patience. There's a quirky sight near the door. A young clerk balancing a stack of 6 tablets, wobbling dangerously as he tries to carry them to a shelf. One slips, thudding to the floor. Everyone in the room freezes. He picks it up gingerly, inspects it, and exhales in relief when he sees it's unharmed. Clay is surprisingly tough once dried, but here, every piece is too important to risk. You take in the room's smell, a mix of clay dust, dried reeds, and the faint oiliness from seal making. Light filters in through narrow windows, cutting the space into stripes of gold and shadow. You notice that the windows are positioned high on the walls, maybe to keep the tablets safe from thieves or to avoid sudden floods of rain. A clerk beckons you over to see something special. A tablet more than a decade old, its once sharp edges rounded with handling. The cuneiform is still readable, the seal impression crisp. He runs a finger along the marks and tells you it records the delivery of grain to the temple in a year of poor harvests, a reminder of a time when the city pulled together to feed its people. It's humbling, holding a piece of clay that remembers more than any single person could. As you leave the storeroom, you notice a reed mat hung over the doorway. The clerk lifts it just enough for you to pass, and the outside light makes you blink. The market noise swells in your ears again, but you can still feel the weight of that quiet room behind you. The sense of thousands of tiny voices, each preserved in clay, each insisting, "This happened." The heat outside seems sharper now, as if the sun has been saving up its glare for you. You follow the scent of yeast and roasted grain until you find yourself in a busy open-front shop that blurs the line between bakery and brewery. The air is thick with the warm, sweet smell of fermenting beer and the nutty scent of fresh bread. Sacks of barley lean against one wall, clay vats line the other, and in the middle, a pair of women knead dough while a man stirs a vat with a paddle the size of an oar. Here, receipts aren't just for goats and onions. They're for the most prized daily staples in the city, beer and bread. Workers, laborers, and temple staff often receive their wages in these forms. You watch a man step up to a low counter, sweat still drying on his forehead, hands rough from hauling stone blocks somewhere across town. He slides a small clay tablet toward the brewer, who glances at it, nods, and fills 2 clay jugs with thick, slightly cloudy beer. The man then steps to the next counter, where a woman hands him 3 round loaves, still warm, their crusts blistered from the oven wall. The whole exchange takes less than a minute, and you realize how crucial the tablet is. It's not payment in itself, but a record of what this man is owed. The brewer doesn't have to trust his memory or the worker's word. The clay remembers. This way, wages can be distributed at the end of a week or a month without chaos. Historians still argue whether these wage tablets always listed exact quantities or if they sometimes functioned more like open tabs, with marks erased or altered as goods were collected. Some surviving examples show neat lists of days and rations. Others seem to be one-off slips, like the ancient equivalent of a drink voucher. Either way, the principle is the same. The receipt is proof, and proof keeps. The piece, behind the counter, a scribe works at a low table, stylus tapping steadily against damp clay. His job is to issue new wage tablets for workers as their shifts end. Every time he finishes one, he rolls a seal across the bottom. Today's design features a stylized fish and a crescent moon. The scribe is careful, but not above a little humor. You notice a tiny doodle scratched in the corner of one tablet, possibly a lopsided loaf or a smiling face. Maybe even scribes get bored when the barley deliveries are late. You step aside to let a woman through. She's balancing a tray with 6 jugs of beer, the frothy tops threatening to slosh over. She moves with the precision of someone who's done this 1,000 times, weaving through the crowd until she reaches a group of men sitting cross-legged in the shade. They break into easy laughter as she hands out the jugs, each man pulling his own tablet to verify what he's due. It's almost comical, half the table holding beer, half holding clay. Quirky detail: the beer here isn't sipped from mugs. It's drunk through long straws to avoid the floating grain husks. The straws are often made from reeds, sometimes decorated with little carvings. You spot one leaning against a wall, carved with tiny fish chasing each other in a spiral. It's a reminder that even in something as practical as wages, people still find room for artistry. In the back, a large oven radiates heat. A young apprentice pulls out another batch of bread, stacking the loaves in reed baskets. Every few minutes, someone calls his name, tablet in hand, and he checks the marks before handing over bread. No receipt, no loaf. It's a rule as strict as temple protocol. And it's not about mistrust so much as it is about fairness. In a city this crowded, even a single day's ration gone astray can cause resentment. The brewer pauses his stirring to greet a man who's just arrived with a heavy sack of barley. They haggle briefly, settle on a price, and then the brewer calls over the scribe. A fresh tablet is made on the spot, one symbol for barley, another for the agreed quantity, and the seal rolled deep enough that the ridges almost catch your fingertip when you brush them. This little slab will sit in the brewer's storage until the barley is used up, ready to prove exactly how much was received and from whom. From outside, you catch a whiff of river air mixed with the distant smell of livestock. The marketplace hums beyond these walls, but here, the rhythm is its own. Stir, knead, mark, seal, pour, hand over. You find yourself wondering how many people in the city depend on this place, not just for their daily bread and beer, but for the steady, almost invisible network of receipts that make sure the right hands get the right rations. A man near the door is struggling to read his own tablet, squinting at the symbols like they're trying to trick him. The scribe leans over, patiently pointing to each mark. There's no shame in needing help. Cuneiform is a skill, and not everyone here has it. The tablet's meaning is clear enough once explained, though, and the man leaves smiling, 2 loaves tucked under his arm. You step back into the sunlight, blinking at the sudden brightness. Behind you, the smell of bread and beer lingers, warm and heavy, like a promise kept. And in your mind, you can still see the clay tablets stacked on the scribe's table, each one a little contract between hunger and satisfaction. The sun is dipping toward the horizon, stretching long shadows across the street, but the market hasn't quieted yet. In fact, a knot of people has gathered near a small awning, their voices sharp and overlapping. You weave closer and find 2 merchants standing face to face, each gripping a clay tablet as if it were a sword. This is what trust issues look like in ancient Sumeria. The first merchant, a tall man with a neatly braided beard, waves his tablet in the air. "This," he says, "proves I delivered 10 jars of beer to his tavern last week." The second, merchant, shorter, broader, with a tunic stained by spilled ale, shakes his head violently. He holds up his own tablet. "This says I paid for all 10. If he didn't write it down right, that's his problem." The crowd murmurs, leaning in to see. Historians still argue whether disputes like this were settled on the spot or always escalated to a city judge. Some evidence suggests that markets often had a neutral scribe on hand to mediate small disagreements, saving the official courts for bigger matters. Judging by the tense circle of spectators here, this might be one of those times. A neutral scribe does, in fact, step forward, a lean man with streaks of gray in his beard and a satchel slung over his shoulder. He takes both tablets, squints at them, and then tilts his head, clearly puzzled. The first tablet shows the delivery symbols. For beer, 10, and the recipient seal. The second tablet shows payment for 10 jars, but the dates don't quite line up. One is marked for the first day of the week, the other for the third. The crowd loves this. Gasps, whispers, a few chuckles from people who probably enjoy the drama more than they care about the outcome. The scribe runs his fingers over the seal. Impressions. One is clean and deep. The other looks faint, almost smeared. He glances at the ale-stained merchant. Was your seal broken when you got this? The man shrugs, looking suddenly unsure. Here's the quirky part. Sometimes, in a rush, a scribe would roll a seal over clay that was already a bit too dry. The result was a shallow, blurry impression, easy for someone to dispute later. In this case, the weak seal could mean carelessness, or it could mean forgery. The scribe doesn't accuse anyone outright, but his arched eyebrow says enough that Tio resolve it. He calls over a witness, an older woman who runs the grain stall next door and apparently saw the exchange last week. She confirms that 10 jars were indeed delivered, but she isn't sure about the payment timing. In the end, the scribe suggests a compromise. The ale seller gives the bearded merchant 2 more jars now to cover any shortfall. Both men grumble, but agree. The crowd disperses, disappointed there wasn't a more scandalous ending. You linger for a moment, thinking about how fragile trust is, even with clay tablets. The whole system depends on careful recording, clear seals, and honest scribes. One smudge, one mismatched date, and suddenly the clay isn't solid ground anymore. It's quicksand. A boy sweeps the area where the crowd stood, muttering about people stepping on his display mats. You glance down and realize he's selling small clay discs with nothing but seal impressions, quick proof tokens for everyday transactions. No words, no numbers, just a mark. It's faster, but you can see how it might cause even more disputes. Without quantities written down, everything depends on mutual memory. And memory, as you've already seen, is slippery in the heat of a Sumerian afternoon. The neutral scribe tucks his stylus back into his belt and gives you a knowing smile as he passes. Clay doesn't lie, he says, but people do. You can tell he said that before the market noise swells again. You realize this little drama is part of why receipts became so important here. They aren't just about recording numbers. They're about managing human nature, smoothing over suspicion before it can spiral into a shouting match. And even when they fail, they leave a trail, something tangible to hold while arguing your case. The sun slips lower, staining the mud brick walls with orange light. Somewhere nearby, a vendor laughs too loudly at his own joke. You head in that direction, leaving behind the 2 merchants, now standing side by side in awkward silence as they load jars into a cart. For them, the deal is settled. For you, it's another reminder that every receipt, whether in clay, paper, or pixels, is really just a fragile bridge between "I promise" and "I believe you." Night falls gently on the city, the heat draining away into the open sky. You find yourself lying on your back atop a flat mud brick roof, the sounds of the marketplace below replaced by the soft chorus of crickets and the occasional bark of a dog. Above you, the stars blaze in the dry air, sharp and bright, as if you could pluck them like dates from a palm. Beside you, a scribe in a loose linen wrap is pointing upward, tracing patterns in the air with his reed stylus. That one, he says, tells me the barley shipment is late. You blink, thinking he's joking, but he's entirely serious. The moon is almost full, and he explains how certain lunar phases are used to estimate the timing of long journeys. If the shipment left when the moon was a crescent and it hasn't arrived by this phase, something's wrong. Historians still argue whether astronomical knowledge in Sumer was mostly for religious ceremony or if it was woven directly into commerce. Some tablets suggest it played a practical role, predicting tides for river travel or marking due dates for contracts based on moon cycles. Here, the stars aren't just decoration. They're a cosmic calendar. The scribe rolls onto his side, pulling a small tablet from a pouch. It's marked with wedge signs for received and delivered, but next to them is a curious symbol, a sliver shape like the crescent moon above. This, he says, tells me the goods must arrive before the moon is fat again. He grins, clearly enjoying your puzzlement. In a world without wristwatches or printed calendars, the sky itself is the clock. Down in the street, you hear the faint clop of donkey hooves. A caravan has just returned, and somewhere in that group, a trader is pulling out a clay receipt to prove his right to unload. The timing matters. If he's late, he might owe compensation. If early, he earns a better reputation, maybe even better terms on his next deal. A quirky aside. The scribe tells you about one infamous merchant who tried to fake an on-time delivery by insisting the moon had reached its new phase later than everyone else thought. The plan fell apart when an entire neighborhood disagreed with him. Apparently, you can't bluff the night sky. You watch as the scribe scratches a note onto his tablet, carefully aligning the symbols with the edges. He's not recording a transaction this time. He's making a reminder for himself to check a certain delivery against the moon's position in 10 nights. In the absence of alarm clocks and sticky notes, this is how you keep your promises aligned with the heavens. The air cools further, carrying the faint smell of cooking fires and baked bread. You hear quiet laughter from a neighboring rooftop, where two women are sharing a jug of beer through long reed straws. Somewhere, a baby cries, then is soothed back to sleep. The city is settling in, but the receipts, those little slabs of authority, are still out there in the dark, tucked under pillows, locked in storerooms, or riding in the pouches of traveling merchants. The scribe finally tucks his tablet away and leans back, his gaze on a bright star low in the east. That one tells me when the river will run high, he says. You're not sure if he's teasing you now, but it wouldn't surprise you. For him, receipts and stars are part of the same system, both ways to mark, measure, and remember. One is pressed in clay, the other in light. As you close your eyes, the hum of the city fades and the stars seem to drift closer. You imagine a shipment of grain gliding silently down the river, its arrival date etched into both a clay tablet and the arc of the moon. And somewhere, a trader is looking up at the same sky, trusting that both will line up just right. By morning, you're moving through a different part of the city, a broad, packed earth road that leads straight to the towering city wall. The air here smells faintly of burnt resin from the guards' torches, and the ground is churned with the tracks of carts and hoofs. Just ahead, you spot a small group of traders approaching the gate, each with a pouch slung across the chest, or a bundle strapped to the back. They're not fumbling for coins or goods. They're fishing out their receipts. The first trader, a man in a green-dyed tunic, produces a rectangular clay tablet about the size of his hand. He hands it to the guard without a word. The guard squints at the cuneiform, traces the seal impression with his thumb, then nods and waves him through. No bribe, no argument. The tablet has done the talking. This is the receipt as passport. Inside the city, it proves you've paid taxes, settled fees, or have the right to bring your goods in. Outside the city, it can grant you safe passage between territories, acting as a universal, "I'm legitimate" badge. Historians still argue whether the system was standardized between cities or if each place made its own rules, forcing traders to juggle multiple receipts like modern-day visas. Evidence leans toward a mix of both, enough common practice to keep trade flowing, but with plenty of local quirks to keep merchants on their toes. You watch as the next trader steps forward. A woman carrying a narrow chest on her shoulder. Her tablet is smaller, more worn at the corners, but the guard treats it with the same respect. He checks the date, the symbols for barley, and the merchant's seal. Satisfied, he waves her on. You can't help noticing how her shoulders relax the moment she's past the gate, like she's been holding her breath the whole time. Then comes a younger man with a basket of dyed wool. He hands over his receipt, but the guard frowns. There's a blotchy smear where the seal should be. The guard calls over a senior officer, who studies the tablet for a long moment before shaking his head. The young man looks stricken. After a quick, tense conversation, the officer agrees to let him through, but only after he rolls his seal again on a fresh tablet at the checkpoint. You can see the relief flood his face when the new proof is handed over. A quirky aside. You hear one guard bragging quietly to another that he can read a merchant's honesty by the way they hand over their tablet. Too fast means nervous, too slow means rehearsed. You're not sure if he's right, but he certainly believes it. Past the gate, you follow a merchant caravan heading the opposite direction, out toward the open plains. They pause to show their receipts at the checkpoint before passing through the heavy wooden doors. Each trader carries the clay proof in a cloth wrap or leather pouch, some even tied to their belts for quick access. It's as much a part of their outfit as their sandals. You overhear a conversation between two older traders comparing their best receipts, tablets that have passed through dozens of gates without a single dispute. One even claims his tablet was once used to settle a dispute between two governors, though he admits it might have been a different tablet, but one that looked exactly like mine. The morning sun glints off the bronze fittings of the gate as it swings shut behind. The last traveler. The guards stack the day's checkpoint tablets in a shallow basket, ready to pass them along to the city scribes for archiving. For every person who entered or left today, there's now a matching clay record somewhere inside the city walls. As you walk back toward the heart of the city, you realize that in a place where suspicion could slow trade to a crawl, these little slabs of clay grease the wheels. They're not just passports. They're proof that the city trusts you enough to open its gates. And in Sumer, that's worth more than any sack of barley. The heat presses down as you make your way toward a narrow stall tucked between a potter's shop and a spice vendor. Here, the sound is different. No clinking jars or bleeding goats, just the faint scratch of reed on clay. A scribe sits hunched, at a low table, his back to the street, working by the light that filters in from above. His stylus moves in small, precise motions, leaving behind the unmistakable wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform. This is where receipts stop being mere impressions of tokens or simple tallies and start turning into written records. The symbols are arranged in neat columns, some made with quick, straight presses, others with angled strokes that catch the light. You recognize the signs for received and delivered from what little you've picked up wandering the market, though to your untrained eyes they look like abstract art. Tiny bird tracks crisscrossing a muddy field. Historians still argue whether cuneiform developed mainly for keeping track of goods or if it began as a way to record spoken language and later got applied to commerce. Some believe the earliest symbols were nothing but stylized pictures of objects, evolving over centuries into a system flexible enough to express contracts, poetry, and even legal disputes. Here, though, the focus is entirely practical. This scribe's job is to make sure no one can argue about what was traded, when, and in what amount. You lean closer and notice that he's not just writing words. He's also adding numbers. Sumerian numbers are a bit tricky. Small vertical wedges. 4 single units, larger angled ones for tens, arranged in clusters. A single mistake could mean the difference between 10 jars of oil and 100, so the scribe pauses after each entry, reading it back silently before moving on. There's a quirky detail in one corner of the tablet, a small, almost hidden wedge. That doesn't seem to fit the pattern. The scribe catches you looking and grins. It's his personal flourish, a mark he adds to every tablet he writes. Not quite a seal, but a way to spot his own work in the archives. In a few thousand years, some archaeologist might puzzle over that tiny wedge, wondering what it meant. A merchant steps into the stall, ducking under the lintel. He's carrying a folded reed mat, which he lays on the floor to reveal its contents. Small jars sealed with clay stoppers, each marked with a different seal impression. The scribe checks them against a clay tag the merchant produces, nodding at each match. Then he writes a fresh tablet, one column for the goods received, one for the goods owed in return. When he's finished, he rolls the merchant's seal along the bottom, then adds his own mark beside it. The tablet is set aside to dry, joining a small stack of others leaning against the wall. You can almost hear the quiet authority in these symbols. Unlike the earlier tokens, which anyone could press into clay, cuneiform requires training. It's not just recording what happened. It's turning memory into a visual code that carries weight in court, at the temple, or in the marketplace. The knowledge of how to write and read it is power, and here, the scribes hold that power in their clay-stained hands. Outside, a boy pokes his head in, holding a lump of clay that's already drying at the edges. The scribe frowns, wets his fingers, and smooths the surface before pressing a few quick symbols into it. The boy thanks him and runs off, clutching the tablet like it's the most important thing in the world. Maybe it is. Maybe that little slab will settle a debt or secure a payment for his family. You notice the tools scattered on the scribe's table. Reed styluses of different widths, a small dish of water, a scrap of leather for wiping his hands. Each tool leaves a slightly different mark, allowing for variations in stroke width, subtle, but enough to matter when fitting a lot of information onto a small surface. He works with a rhythm, dipping, pressing, lifting, turning the tablet, almost like a potter shaping clay into a bowl. From somewhere outside, a gust of wind brings the smell of cumin and coriander and the distant cry of a vendor selling fish. The scribe doesn't even glance up. He's too deep in his work. For him, each wedge is a piece of a puzzle that has to be perfect before the clay hardens. When you finally step away, blinking in the sunlight, you carry with you the image of that tablet. Rows of sharp, orderly marks, each one a fixed truth. In a world where memories fade and stories change. Here, the Sumerians are inventing not just receipts, but a written language that will outlast their city walls. The street bends toward the city wall, and you find yourself in a slow-moving line of people snaking past a low gatehouse. The air is thick with dust and impatience. Some carry sacks of barley, others baskets of dates, a few lead reluctant goats by short ropes. This isn't a market queue. It's tax day. The governor's officials sit under a broad awning, each with a low table stacked with clay tablets. Every person approaching the gate owes something to the city: grain, oil, livestock, labor. And every person who pays leaves with one thing in hand: a receipt. Without it, you could be stopped on the road tomorrow and accused of dodging your civic duty. You watch a man shuffle forward with 2 sacks slung across his shoulders. He drops them beside the clerk's table, dust rising in a golden cloud. The clerk checks their weight, then presses the details into a fresh tablet. One sign for barley, one for the amount, and the date. He rolls his seal across the bottom, then hands the tablet to the man, who tucks it into his sash like a precious charm. Historians still argue whether these receipts were strictly proof of payment or if they doubled as permits to trade freely. Within the city, some records suggest that once your taxes were settled, you could pass in and out of the gates without harassment. Others think they were purely administrative, meant to keep track of who had given to the city and who hadn't. Either way, the system clearly hinges on having proof in hand. A woman steps up next, her goat bleeding in protest. The clerk scratches his beard, counts the goat as part of her payment, and makes the necessary marks in clay. When he rolls his seal, the impression shows a stylized goat head. It's either a coincidence or a subtle joke. The woman smiles faintly, tugs her goat away, and joins the line of those leaving with proof in hand. The quirky part is what happens next. A young boy in the line behind her drops his tablet onto the packed earth, where it lands with a dull thud. Before he can grab it, a stray dog sniffs it, decides it's not edible, and wanders off. The boy retrieves it, brushing away dust as if it were a wounded bird. He looks around nervously. Losing your tax receipt here isn't just inconvenient. It's dangerous. Without it, the officials at the next gate could seize your goods or fine you again. The queue moves slowly, punctuated by the scratch of styluses and the occasional grunt as a heavy sack changes hands. The air hums with low conversation. Some people mutter about the fairness of their dues. Others trade jokes to pass the time. You catch one man telling his neighbor that the governor must have the biggest storerooms in Sumer, filled floor to ceiling with taxes no one will ever see again. The neighbor laughs, then glances at the clerk and lowers his voice. When your turn comes to the front, you step close enough to see the clerk's tablet up close. It's slightly curved from drying unevenly, but the marks are clean and deep. You can smell the faint metallic tang of the clay, mixed with the resin oil he's rubbed into his seal to keep it from sticking. He finishes an entry, sets the tablet in a drying rack, and starts on the next without looking up. His motions are mechanical, the same practiced rhythm repeated dozens, maybe hundreds of times a day. Off to the side, another official checks receipts against a larger ledger tablet. This one is so big it rests on a wooden stand, and its surface is crammed with wedge marks in tight, orderly rows. He runs his finger down a column, finds the matching entry, and grunts approval before waving a taxpayer on. The system is slow, but it's thorough. Every name, every payment cross-referenced. As you leave the gatehouse area, you pass under the shadow of the city wall. It looms high above, its mud brick surface warm in the late light. Beyond it, the open plain stretches toward the horizon, dotted with date palms and the occasional puff of dust from passing herds. You glance back at the line, at the people clutching their fresh tablets like lifelines, and you understand. Here, a receipt, isn't just about numbers. It's permission, protection, and proof that you've done your part to keep the city turning. Without it, the gates stay shut. With it, you can pass freely, knowing the clay in your hand carries the weight of the governor's own seal. The midday sun glares off the pale mud brick walls as you pass through a narrow alley and into a shaded courtyard. The air here is cooler, but the tension is thick enough to feel on your skin. A group of people is gathered in a semicircle around a low platform. On it sits a man in a long linen robe, a tablet in one hand, his other hand drumming the stylus against his knee. This is the city's court, and today's case revolves around what else? A missing receipt. Two men stand before the judge. The first is a merchant with an elaborate beard and a voice that carries. He claims he delivered a shipment of sesame oil to the second man, a tavern owner, but never got paid. The tavern owner protests that he did pay, and that a receipt was given, but that the merchant lost it. The crowd murmurs, leaning forward. It's a classic my word against yours moment, except here. The clay is supposed to speak louder than either voice. Historians still argue whether courts in Sumer relied solely on written proof or if verbal testimony could overrule a tablet. Surviving records suggest a mix. The clay carried enormous weight, but respected witnesses could sway a decision, especially if the receipt was missing or damaged. In this case, the judge listens in silence, eyes flicking between the two men. The merchant insists he never received payment and that no tablet exists to prove otherwise. The tavern owner says the receipt was lost in a roof leak that turned half his storeroom into a mud pit. You can almost hear the collective intake of breath. Clay tablets are tough, but enough water will turn them right back into sludge. The judge gestures to a clerk, who produces a master ledger tablet from the archives. It's heavy, thick, covered, edge to edge in wedge marks. The clerk runs his stylus down a column until he finds the relevant date. He frowns. There's an entry for the delivery, but no matching entry for payment. The tavern owner sweats under his linen cap. Here's the quirky twist. A witness steps forward, an older woman who runs a spice stall next to the tavern. She swears she saw the tavern owner hand over a lump of silver to the merchant that day. She even remembers the merchant joking about using it to buy better sandals. The judge raises an eyebrow, clearly amused, but doesn't let it show for long. In the end, the judge issues a compromise ruling. The tavern owner must pay half the disputed amount again, and the clerk will record the payment immediately. The new receipt will be stored in both men's names, sealed twice, once with the clerk's cylinder and once with the judge's own. Neither party looks happy, but neither dares argue. As the crowd disperses, you catch the judge's clerk carefully, setting the new tablet on a drying rack in the shade. He writes a note on a separate scrap of clay, cross-referencing the case for future review. You realize that these court-issued receipts are more than just economic tools, they're legal lifelines. Without them, even a truthful man can lose. In court, a younger scribe sidles up to you, clearly eager to talk. He tells you about one case where a missing receipt led to a month-long trial, with witnesses brought in from 3 different cities. The verdict hinged on a smudged seal impression that, when rolled again in fresh clay, matched perfectly. That moment, he says, got more cheers than a wrestling match. The sun is lower when you step back into the street, the sound of the court fading behind you. Somewhere nearby, a vendor hawks honey cakes, and children run past with reed hoops rolling ahead of them. But in the back of your mind, the lesson lingers. In Sumer, the truth doesn't just live in memory, it lives in clay. And in court, if you can't put your proof on the judge's table, your word is just another sound lost in the crowd. The day has turned heavy with clouds, the kind that hang low and bruise the sky. You can smell the river before you see it, muddy, metallic, restless. Down by the quay, traders and porters move quickly, eager to unload before the weather breaks. The air hums with urgency. Somewhere nearby, a donkey brays, startled by the sudden crack of distant thunder. You follow a pair of men carrying a wooden crate between them. They set it down under an awning, and one of them reaches for a clay tablet tucked into a leather wrap at his waist. He unwraps it carefully, holding it flat in both hands. It's a receipt for the shipment, dates, quantities, seals, all pressed deep and clean. He sets it on a reed mat, ready for the scribe to check it against the delivery. Then, the first fat raindrop splats onto the clay, Everyone freezes for a fraction of a second, and then chaos erupts. Tarps are pulled over crates. People shout to move goods inside, and the man with the receipt tablet lets out a curse that probably transcends languages. He snatches it up, but the rain is already spattering harder. Wet clay is no friend to find. Wedge marks, too much water, and the tablet will smear or crumble, turning proof into a handful of useless sludge. Historians still argue how often important receipts were baked to preserve them, versus left raw to save time and reuse clay. Some evidence shows that high-value transactions were baked immediately, but day-to-day dealings often relied on sun-drying, a method fine in good weather, disastrous in a sudden storm that a young apprentice scribe grabs the tablet and bolts toward. The nearest kiln, sandals slapping in the mud. You jog after him, rain soaking into your tunic. Inside, the kiln is hot and dim, smelling of smoke and scorched earth. The apprentice hands the tablet to the kiln master, who slides it in alongside. A row of small bowls. "It'll be safe now," he mutters, "if it wasn't too wet already." Meanwhile, back at the quay, the rain is turning the packed earth into a slick mess. A crate topples, spilling jars into the mud. One breaks, releasing a wave of fishy brine that mixes with the runoff. The scribe in charge shakes his head and adds a quick note to his own tablet, "One jar lost to storm." It's a reminder that receipts don't just record what's exchanged. They also log what's lost along the way. Here's a quirky sight. A trader shielding his tablet under his own tunic, holding it like a newborn while rain drips off his nose. His assistant laughs at him, until another gust sends a sheet of water cascading off the awning and onto her unprotected tablet. The laughter stops instantly. By the time the storm eases, the quay looks like a battlefield, mud everywhere, puddles reflecting the gray sky, people covered in splatters. The baked tablet emerges from the kiln, its marks still sharp. The owner cradles it like a trophy, grinning in relief. Another trader, less lucky, holds a softened lump that was once a receipt. He'll have to argue his case without it as you walk away. You can't help thinking about how fragile the system can be. All it takes is a few minutes of rain to wash away the truth. In a world without backups, clay is both a shield and a gamble. You either protect it fiercely or pray the weather stays on your side. The road beyond the city wall crunches under your sandals, packed hard by years of caravans coming and going. Ahead, a line of sheep shuffles along in a cloud of pale dust. They're already matted from the day's heat. Bells made from bent bronze sheets jingle at uneven intervals, the sound oddly hypnotic. You fall into step beside them, following the caravan as it winds toward the open plain. The lead herder, a wiry man with a sun-darkened face, carries something. Under his arm, not a shepherd's crook, but a clay tablet wrapped in a scrap of cloth. Every so often, he glances at it, muttering to himself. This isn't a shopping list, it's a receipt. Not for taxes, not for wages, but for the very animals walking in front of you. The tablet lists the number of sheep he left the city with, the owner's seal, and the date. Without it, the handoff at the other end could turn into a shouting match. Historians still argue whether such livestock receipts were primarily about protecting the owner's property or about reassuring buyers along the way. Some believe they also served as transit documents, recognized by multiple cities along the route, so guards at checkpoints would know the animals weren't stolen. Whatever the truth, the herder clearly treats this tablet as something worth more than gold. The trail narrows near a shallow stream, and the sheep bunch together, jostling for space. One leaps sideways into the water, splashing everyone nearby. The herder curses under his breath, then pulls out a small clay tag from his pouch, a quick tally mark for a sheep that might need to be replaced if injured. It's a clever system. The main receipt stays safe in its cloth wrap, while small tags keep track of mishaps along the road. You notice a younger herder trailing behind, balancing a basket on his back. Inside are extra clay tags, a lump of damp clay, and a reed stylus. Out here, they can't run back to a city scribe every time something changes. They have to record things on the fly. A sheep gives birth? Make a new tag. One dies or wanders off. Break the old tag and note it down. It's accounting in real time, with dust, flies, and the occasional runaway animal as distractions. That a quirky moment unfolds when one sheep stops to stare at you. Long, unblinking, as if it's trying to decide whether you're friend or foe. The younger herder laughs and says something about checking your seal, clearly amused by the idea of a sheep being an auditor. By midday, the caravan pauses in a patch of shade near a grove of tamarisk trees. The herders unroll their reed mats, pull out bread and dried dates, and pour water from skin bags into shallow bowls for the sheep. The lead herder checks his tablet again, running his finger over each mark as if making sure nothing has shifted. In the clay while they walked, satisfied, he wraps it again and tucks it back under his arm. From where you sit, you can see faint hoofprints leading away into the distance. Another caravan passed here earlier, maybe heading toward a different city. You imagine how many of these moving lines of animals crisscross the plains at any given time, each one linked to a little clay tablet somewhere, proof that someone entrusted them to someone else. In the late afternoon, the caravan reaches a small way station, a cluster of mud brick rooms, a corral, and a shallow well. The herder presents his tablet to the station clerk, who compares it to a master list scratched into a larger slab of clay. The clerk nods, makes a small wedge mark on the corner of the herder's tablet, and waves them through. It's like getting your passport stamped, only dustier. The sun is lowering by the time they reach the edge of another city. Guards at the gate glance at the herd, then at the clay tablet. One guard even taps it lightly, as if testing its authenticity by sound. Satisfied, they wave the caravan inside. The sheep shuffle forward, unaware that their entire journey has been tracked and validated in little marks on baked mud as you follow them through the gate. You can't help thinking that these receipts are more than proof. They're lifelines, connecting 2 points on a map. Without them, a herder might arrive with a full flock and still be accused of theft. With them, the path between here and there is carved into clay, unchangeable, solid, and, at least for now, trusted. The rain has rinsed the city clean, leaving the streets smelling of wet earth and faint wood smoke. You follow the sound of laughter and clinking cups into a wide, low-ceilinged building whose doorway is framed with woven reed mats. Inside, the air is warm and heavy with the scent of beer and baking bread. Long benches are crowded with men and women sitting shoulder to shoulder, leaning over wide jars to drink through reed straws at a first glance. This could be any Sumerian tavern, a place to swap stories, make deals, or forget them. But then you spot the scribe in the corner, his table cluttered with small clay tablets. He's not here to drink. He's here to record. Even in this relaxed, noisy place, receipts are at work. The brewer with flour-dusted arms approaches the scribe, tablet in hand. She passes it over, and the scribe reads it quickly, nods, and makes a new mark on it. This is a tally for the beer she's delivering to the tavern tonight. Once the mark is made, the tablet is placed on a drying rack wedged between the wall and the table leg, a bit of organization in the middle of chaos. Historians still argue whether taverns used formal receipt systems or if this was a local adaptation of temple bookkeeping. Some think taverns started keeping their own clay records to avoid disputes with suppliers. How many jugs came in? How many were paid for? How many were still owed? Others believe the temple may have encouraged it, since temple workers often drank here and their rations had to be accounted for. You watch a customer approach the scribe with a smaller tablet, worn smooth at the edges. He hands it over along with a few copper scraps. The scribe checks the symbols, calls to the brewer, and soon a jug of beer appears at the man's table. It's not so different from flashing a drink ticket at a modern bar, except your ticket weighs a few hundred grams and could double as a weapon if thrown hard enough. At a quirky moment, one man finishes his beer and jokingly asks the scribe to write him a receipt for drinking it well. The scribe plays along, making a quick symbol on a scrap of clay and handing it over. The man shows it off to his friends, who roar with laughter. Somewhere in the future, an archaeologist might find that scrap and spend weeks trying to interpret the official record of a particularly satisfying drink. The room's energy ebbs and flows. At one table, 2 merchants are quietly sealing a deal over bread and beer, sliding a clay tablet between them. At another, a group of workers are paying for the next round with tablets they've received as part of their wages. Beer is currency, recorded and spent without a single grain of silver changing hands. The scribe never stops moving. He dips his stylus in water to keep the clay workable, presses deep, deliberate marks, and rolls seals when needed. Each finished piece is placed carefully on the rack, the soft clink of clay against clay almost lost under the noise of the crowd. The corner, a small boy balances on a bench to hand his father's wage tablet to the brewer. She glances at it, counts out 2 small loaves of bread, and sends him off with a pat on the head. Even here, in the most casual of settings, the rules hold. No tablet, no goods as the evening wears on. The air thickens with the smell of warm grain and human bodies. You step outside for a breath of cooler air. Behind you, laughter spills into the street, along with the faint tap of stylus on clay. The tavern is proof that receipts aren't confined to dusty storerooms or temple ledgers. They follow the grain from field to mug, from oven to hand, no matter how loud the room or how late the hour. The next morning, the city is quiet except for the muffled thud of clay being shaped. You follow the sound into a narrow workshop tucked behind a row of market stalls. Inside, the air is cool and smells faintly of damp earth. Long wooden shelves sag under the weight of unfired clay tablets. Some blank, others crowded with neat wedge marks. But what catches your eye are the ones set apart on a table near the window. Receipts so beautifully crafted they could almost be mistaken for art. A man in a clay-streaked tunic is bent over one of these tablets, his fingers moving with a potter's precision. He isn't just recording goods, he's sculpting the surface. Around the cuneiform text, he's carved tiny reliefs, a pair of goats, a sheaf of barley, a jug tipped in mid-pour. The artistry doesn't change the meaning of the receipt, but it changes the way it feels. This is a record that demands to be noticed, to be kept. Historians still argue whether such decorated receipts were commissioned by wealthy merchants to show off, or if they were sometimes given as special tokens, perhaps for temple donations, or as part of a ceremonial exchange. Some believe they could serve double duty, a record of payment and a piece of status display, left out on a household shelf where visitors could admire it. The artisan looks up, notices your interest, and grins. He picks up another tablet, this one bordered by a band of repeating fish shapes. Shipment to the fishmongers, he explains, before rolling a seal in the center. Even the seal is elaborate, a scene of a river winding through reeds, dotted with birds. It's clear that the line between utility and beauty is thin here, and sometimes crossed deliberately on a nearby stool. A young apprentice is etching small doodles into the edge of a drying tablet. They're rough sketches of what look like donkeys, each with oversized ears. The master sees them, raises an eyebrow, but doesn't erase them. Maybe he knows that even the quirks can make a receipt memorable. You run your fingers lightly over one of the finished tablets. The carved details catch against your skin, the grooves deeper than the cuneiform marks. This one records the delivery of grain to a brewer, but the top corner features a tiny sun with radiating lines, a flourish that has nothing to do with the transaction and everything to do with pride in the work. Quirky detail, the artisan pulls out a receipt shaped not like a flat slab, but like a small jar with writing wrapped around its sides. Special order, he says with a shrug, as if creating a 3D receipt is nothing unusual. You imagine some future archaeologist finding it and wondering if it was meant to be functional, ceremonial, or both. As he works, the artisan talks about how certain clients prefer their receipts baked with a glaze-like wash to give them a warmer color, while others request unusual shapes to make forgery harder. In a way, each decorated receipt is like a fingerprint, not just proof of a transaction, but proof of who wanted it remembered in style. You step back and take in the whole workshop, the neat stacks of standard tablets, the careful rows of drying artistic pieces, the light filtering through the high window and catching on the damp surfaces. It's a reminder that even in something as seemingly dull as record-keeping, there's room for beauty, humor, and individuality. As you leave, the artisan calls after you. A plain receipt will last a lifetime. A beautiful one will be remembered longer. You're not sure if he's talking about clay or about people, but in either case, it's hard to disagree. You cut back toward the market square just as the morning bustle swells, voices rising and overlapping in the dusty air. Near a shaded colonnade, you notice a small group gathered around a low table where 2 scribes sit facing each other. Between them lies a fresh clay tablet, still damp, its surface marked with a mirror image layout. 2 identical sets of cuneiform, Side by side, one scribe presses his stylus into the left half, recording the delivery of a shipment of dried figs. The other scribe copies every mark exactly onto the right half. When they're done, the tablet is cut neatly down the middle with a taut reed cord, leaving each man holding an identical half receipt. It's a scene that feels both strangely modern and unmistakably ancient, like watching two people sign duplicate contracts before each tucks one away. Historians still argue whether this duplication was purely for fraud prevention or if it served as a mutual backup in case one party's receipt was lost. Some surviving examples suggest both halves could be matched later to prove authenticity, the broken edges fitting together like a key. Others think merchants simply liked having their own copy in hand without needing to visit an archive. A merchant with a wide-brimmed hat steps forward next, carrying a bundle of reed mats. The process repeats, marks pressed into each half, seals rolled across the bottom, and the tablet split. The cuts are surprisingly clean. Practice makes perfect, and the halves are carefully wrapped in cloth before disappearing into each man's satchel. Here's the quirky part. One scribe has carved a tiny mark on the edge of his reed-cut tablet, a little fish shape that has nothing to do with the goods. "So, I know which half is mine," he says with a grin. It's not exactly official, but it adds a personal layer to an already personal system. You watch a third transaction, this one involving a shipment of clay jars. The scribes work quickly, their hands moving in tandem, occasionally glancing at each other to keep the symbols aligned. A young apprentice hovers nearby with a tray of soft tablets ready for use, replacing them as soon as the last is cut. The rhythm is smooth. Mark, copy, seal, slice, wrap, hand off. One of the merchants receiving his half looks over it carefully before slipping it into a leather pouch. His thumb lingers over the seal impression, pressing lightly as if committing the texture to memory. Without both halves, the deal is harder to challenge. With them, the pieces could be reunited in court to prove that no alterations had been made. It's a simple idea, but one that makes the clay feel even more like a living part of the transaction. Quirky detail. A boy runs up and tugs on the scribe's sleeve, asking if he can have the thin strip of clay that flakes off during cutting. The scribe laughs and hands it over. The boy immediately shapes it into a little animal, something between a goat and a dog, and runs off, proud of his improvised by midday. The table is piled with small cloth-wrapped bundles. The scribes gather their tools, clearly preparing to move to another part of the market. As they leave, the apprentices carry the extra half tablets in reed baskets, heading toward the city archives for storage. Somewhere in that cool, quiet space, these halves will sit alongside their twins, waiting for the rare day they might be reunited to settle a dispute. You step back into the flow of the market, your mind turning over the simple elegance of the system. Two halves, two keepers, one truth, split but never broken. It's a reminder that even in a world without paper, carbon copies, or cloud backups, people still found ways to ensure that what was agreed upon could be proven, even years later. The afternoon heat shimmers over the rooftops as you wander toward the quieter quarter near the temple archives. A narrow doorway leads you into a cool, dim room where the smell of dried reeds and baked clay hangs in the air. Rows of shelves rise along the walls, each stacked with tablets in orderly rows. A few are neatly labeled with clay tags. Others have small painted symbols dabbed on in red or black. At a long central table, three modern-day-looking figures, at least modern compared to the Sumerians outside, are hunched over tablets there, linen sleeves rolled up. They're not scribes of the market. They're scholars of their own time, poring over records from decades past. The quiet is broken only by the soft clink of clay against clay and the occasional murmured debate. One scholar lifts a tablet close to the light streaming in from a high-slit window. "See here," he says, pointing to a small mark beside the symbol for barley. "That's not standard. Could be decorative, or could mean something else entirely." The others lean in, frowning. You realize you've stumbled into a conversation about the purpose of receipts themselves, something people have been debating for millennia. Historians still argue whether some receipts were more symbolic than practical, tokens of trust given after a deal, but never intended for long-term record-keeping. Were they, in some cases, more about ceremony than about enforcement? A few tablets here seem to support that theory. Perfectly baked, elaborately sealed, yet recording tiny, almost trivial exchanges, a handful of dates, a single jug of beer. Were those just keepsakes of goodwill between trading partners? Or were they as binding as any large-scale shipment log? One scholar taps the table for emphasis. If it's purely ceremonial, she says, why store it here for 30 years? Another counters that it might have been archived for the same reason people save wedding invitations or awards, because it mattered personally, not because it was needed in court. Quirky detail. One of the tablets on the table has, alongside its tidy cuneiform, a small carved flower in the corner. No one here can agree if it's an official mark or the ancient equivalent of doodling during a slow afternoon. The scholars laugh quietly, acknowledging that even after years of study, some answers are as elusive as the people who pressed these marks. The younger assistant approaches with a tray holding several half-broken tablets. He sets them down and carefully fits pieces together, much like a puzzle. Occasionally, two fragments click into place, revealing a complete record that hasn't been read in centuries. The satisfaction on his face when the cuneiform flows unbroken across the seam is almost contagious. As the light shifts in the room, the lead scholar gently sets aside the barley tablet and pulls out another from deeper in the shelf. This one is heavier, its seal impression worn from handling. She explains that it records a transaction between two cities. Goods exchanged, payments noted, but the debate is whether it was ever enforced. There's no matching follow-up tablet in either archive. Maybe it was paid in full, she muses. Or maybe it was forgotten entirely. The room hums softly with these questions, the air thick with clay dust and curiosity. You can feel the weight of all the unspoken history here. How many of these little slabs held real power in their time, and how many were simply gestures? As much about social connection as economic necessity. As you step back into the doorway, one scholar calls after you with a wry smile. Careful. Receipts may look straightforward, but they're full of secrets. You believe her. Out in the bright afternoon, the noise of the city rushes back, but in your mind, the quiet debates of that archive linger, reminding you that even the smallest mark in clay can open a door to questions no one will ever fully answer. The sun is low when you find yourself back near the river docks. But this time the scene feels different, more hurried, more chaotic. Boats are being loaded not just with sacks of grain and jars of oil, but with something else, ideas. Traders from other cities, some speaking languages you barely recognize, are moving among the locals, comparing goods and, more importantly, comparing paperwork. In their hands are receipts, but not the flat, palm-sized tablets you've seen all day. Some are long and narrow, designed to roll up and store easily. Others are pressed into curved surfaces, as if they once wrapped around jars or bundles. You quickly realize you're looking at receipts that have left Sumer and come back transformed today. Merchant from upriver shows a dockworker a thin, baked tablet coated in a pale wash. The symbols aren't just cuneiform, they're mixed with another script, unfamiliar but flowing. He explains, in halting Sumerian, that in his city they still track trades in clay, but for small deals they've started using strips of beaten plant fiber, papyrus. The idea is spreading slowly, carried in pockets and cargo bundles, like a whisper about a new way to remember. Historians still argue whether the shift from clay to lighter materials began as a matter of convenience for traveling merchants, or if it came from administrative reform in far-off courts. Some believe the portability alone would have made it appealing. Imagine crossing deserts without the weight of baked mud in your satchel. Others think the prestige of using exotic writing surfaces was a selling point, signaling wealth and cosmopolitan taste. On the dock, a Sumerian scribe watches one of these papyrus receipts being unrolled. His eyebrows rise. He traces the inked lines with one finger, then flips it over, puzzled that it has no thickness, no satisfying weight. How do you keep it from crumbling? He asks. The foreign merchant just smiles and tucks it back into a reed case. A quirky scene unfolds nearby. Two traders swap receipts as souvenirs, one handing over a small wax-covered wooden tablet from the north, the other passing a baked Sumerian piece in return. They roll the items in cloth, almost ceremonially, and each leaves with a little piece of another place's bookkeeping system. You follow a caravan preparing to leave. The lead merchant checks his own stack of tablets, some local, some from cities far beyond the horizon. He places them in a leather satchel, each wrapped separately, as if they're charms or relics. To him, they are proof that he can pass gates, claim goods, or demand payment wherever his route takes him. Down the quay, a young apprentice practices scratching symbols into a wax tablet, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. His teacher nods approvingly. Easier to erase, he says, but easier to lose. You realize that every new medium brings its own strengths and risks. Clay might shatter, papyrus might tear, wax might melt. And yet, the core idea remains the same. A transaction remembered in a portable, tangible form that as the boats push off. The dock feels momentarily emptier, as if part of the city's memory has floated away with them. You can imagine these receipts traveling far beyond the Sumerian plains, carried over mountains, tucked into caravan chests, unrolled in bustling ports. And somewhere, in a market you've never seen, a merchant will unseal a bundle, lay out a strange piece of writing, and explain, "This means they owe me." The light is fading fast when you wander back into the city, following the smell of cooking fires and the soft murmur of evening trade. You pause at a small stall selling oil lamps, their clay bodies still warm from the kiln. The merchant smiles and hands you one to examine, and then, almost out of habit, reaches for a small scrap of parchment-thin bark on which he scrawled a few marks in soot ink. He presses it into your palm like a farewell gift. It takes you a moment to realize what you're holding. It's not a receipt for this lamp. You didn't even pay, but it is a receipt of sorts, proof of a transaction of goodwill. And just like that, you're thinking of the stack of crumpled paper slips in your own wallet back home. You turn the bark scrap over, feeling its faint ridges, and your mind drifts. That crumpled grocery receipt, the gas station slip, the concert ticket, stub, they're all descendants of these first marks in clay. The line from Sumer to the checkout counter runs straighter than you expect. A mark to remember, a token to prove, an object that outlives the moment. Historians still argue whether it's fair to call our modern receipts a direct continuation of Sumerian ones. Some insist the purpose has shifted from mutual trust to legal compliance, from personal record to corporate bookkeeping. Others point out that the emotional thread remains. The comfort of having something to hold when memory alone won't do. A boy runs past carrying a baked tablet, still warm from the kiln. He's grinning as if it's treasure, and in a way it is his proof that a debt is settled, something he can show to anyone who doubts him. You watch him disappear into the crowd and think of the plastic card in your own pocket, the banking app on your phone, the email that confirms your order. All new shapes, same heartbeat. Quirky thought. Somewhere, right now, someone is probably framing a particularly funny or unusual receipt, just as someone in Sumer might have kept a beautifully decorated clay tablet on their household shelf. Proof doesn't always have to be purely functional. Sometimes it's a story you want to keep. You slip the bark scrap into your own pouch and keep walking, the streets narrowing toward your lodging. The oil lamps are being lit now, one by one, little orange eyes opening in the dusk. You pass a doorway where a merchant is locking away his day's receipts, clay tablets stacked in a reed chest, sealed with a knot and a drop of wax. He glances at you, nods, and keeps working. Tomorrow, those same tablets will be stacked in the city archive, where they might sit for decades or crumble to dust within a year. Either way, the transaction will have been marked, remembered, made real. And just like that, you're back in your own time in your mind, holding a paper slip with fading ink, wondering if you'll keep it, toss it, or let it drift to the bottom of a drawer. You realize it doesn't matter. The act of giving and receiving it has already done its work. In your hand, whether it's clay or paper, is the same quiet magic the Sumerians knew, a moment caught and held against forgetting. The night air has settled into that perfect in-between, cool enough to lift the day's heat from your skin, warm enough to keep the streets alive. You slow your steps, letting the marketplace sounds fade to a low hum somewhere behind you. The smell of clay and grain is still there, but softer now, carried on the same breeze that tugs at the edge of your tunic. You find yourself walking along the riverbank, where the water glints in the lamplight like strands of black silk. Traders' voices are faint across the water, and the occasional splash from a fish feels louder than it should. You notice your breathing has slowed without you trying. Each inhale deeper, each exhale longer. The clay dust you've been inhaling all day seems to have settled in your mind as much as on your sandals. All those transactions, all those little slabs of proof, they're still stacked somewhere behind your eyes, but they're not shouting anymore. They're just resting. You think of the quiet storerooms, the gentle scratch of a stylus, the soft clink of a tablet placed on a shelf. Even here by the river, you can feel that rhythm, slower now, like a tide that's just turned out. A thin crescent moon hangs low over the rooftops, the same moon the scribes watched to mark deliveries. You picture one of them now, on his own roof. Stylus idle for the night, gaze tilted upward. Maybe he's thinking about tomorrow's work, or maybe he's not thinking about anything at all. Either way, the city breathes with him. You pause beside a stone step leading right down into the water. The current makes a sound like distant whispers, as if the river itself is reciting the records it's carried: grain barges, wool bundles, jars of beer, each transaction already pressed into clay and tucked away. You realize the receipts aren't just for people. They're for the city's memory, a way for it to keep telling its own story long after the storytellers are gone. The breeze shifts, carrying a faint trace of incense from the temple district. It's the same scent that clung to the offering tablets earlier, but now it's softened, almost sweet. You lean against the step's edge, feeling the cool stone under your palm, and let your shoulders drop. The urgency of the day has thinned into nothing but quiet persistence, like a stylus that keeps moving long after the noise of the market has stopped. Somewhere upriver, a dog barks once, then goes silent. The ripples it sends through the night vanish almost as soon as they appear, just like the voices that once haggled over every mark in the clay. But the clay remembers, and so do you. You stand there for a long time, letting the sounds, the scents, the cool air fold over you. The city is still working in its way, scribes baking tablets, traders tying knots in reed cords, guards locking gates. But it's slower now, like it's giving itself permission to rest. And in that slowing, you feel yourself drifting a little, not toward sleep just yet, but toward the space where sleep will find you without effort. The river's murmuring fades behind you as you wander deeper into the quieter lanes, where the lamp glow pools in little golden circles on the packed earth. Here, the air feels thicker, warmer, as if the walls themselves are holding onto the day's heat. The sounds are softer now, a clay jar being set gently on a shelf, the rustle of reed mats drawn across doorways, the faint creak of rope as someone hauls up a water bucket for the night. You pass a doorway left half open and glimpse a scribe inside, alone at his low table. He's not hunched in the tense way you saw during the day. Instead, he moves slowly, pressing deliberate, almost lazy marks into a small tablet. This isn't business. There's no rush, no line of impatient customers. It's something else, maybe a personal note, or a quiet summary of the day's work. The marks seem smaller, the lines closer together, like he's tucking the words in for the night. The faint tap of stylus on clay becomes part of the background hum, alongside the distant lapping of water in the canals, the occasional shuffle of sandals in the dust. You find your steps slowing to match that rhythm, each pace steady, unhurried. The city, too, seems to be exhaling now, every alley releasing its last bit of heat into the dark. You pause at a small courtyard where three children sit in a loose circle, arranging smooth pebbles on the ground. They're laughing quietly, inventing trades. One buys a pebble for a twist of string, another sells it back for a broken reed. They're mimicking what they see in the marketplace, but their receipts are drawn into the dust with a stick. Tomorrow the marks will be gone, but tonight, they matter in the same way a clay tablet matters. They make the game real. A cat winds around your ankles, its fur warm from lying in some hidden pocket of sunlight all afternoon. It looks up briefly, then slips away into the shadows without a sound. You keep walking, feeling the quiet gather around you like a soft blanket. Somewhere above, the breeze stirs the tops of palm trees, making the fronds whisper to one another. The sound overlaps with the low murmur of two neighbors leaning against a wall, sharing the last gossip of the day. Their voices are calm, the words drawn out, as though they've decided there's no need to rush through anything anymore. You think about the thousands of tablets you've seen in the past days, stacked, shelved, sealed, passed from hand to hand. In the dark, you can almost hear them settling into place, their edges cooling, their surfaces holding onto every mark. Those records don't need light to keep their truth. They just rest and wait, in the same way the city rests and waits for tomorrow. The air smells faintly of baking bread again. Someone, somewhere, getting a head start on the morning. The warmth of it reaches you even here, a reminder that the cycle will start over soon enough. Trade, record, seal, store. But for now, the only sealing is of doors against the night, the only recording done in the soft memory of those still awake. You turn down one last narrow lane, the kind that seems to close around you like a tunnel. At its far end, a single lamp burns in a clay niche. The flame wavers in the breeze, casting gentle shadows across the walls. And as you step into that small pool of light, you realize you've been walking in step with the city's slowing heartbeat, letting it lead you toward a place where the noise is gone, the dust has settled, and all that's left is the quiet certainty that everything important has been remembered. The lamp's glow fades behind you as you step into the open again, under a sky so dark it feels endless. Stars scatter in every direction, some sharp and bright, others faint as the memory of a dream you almost forgot. The night air is cooler, here, almost weightless, and you find yourself breathing deeper, slower, without meaning to. Somewhere nearby, the city wall looms like a sleeping giant, its mud brick surface catching only the faintest starlight. Beyond it lies the plain, quiet. Now, but tomorrow it will hum again with caravans, livestock, and the steady tramp of sandal soles on packed earth. You stand for a moment, just listening. The wind brushes past your ears, carrying the barest hints of grain, river water, and wood smoke. You think of the day, the market's noisy disputes, the temple's measured quiet, the steady tap of stylus on clay. All those transactions, recorded and sealed, stacked in storerooms or tucked into sashes, are now somewhere out of sight. Some are drying in the night air, others already cooling in archives, each one a tiny heartbeat in the city's memory. Historians still argue about what mattered most in those little slabs: the goods they described, the trust they enforced, or the act of recording itself. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the point was always the same: to take something fleeting and give it weight, to hold it still in your hand before it could slip away. A quirky image drifts through your mind. A merchant centuries from now, holding a thin paper slip or scrolling through a glowing screen, unknowingly echoing the same gesture a Sumerian made with clay. Different tools, same motion, turning the proof over, checking the marks, tucking it away. You start walking again, this time toward the river's edge. The current moves like black glass, silent but certain, carrying with it the reflections of every torch and lantern along the bank. Somewhere in the dark, a herder checks the clay tag tied to a rope, a guard touches the seal on a gatehouse chest, a brewer rests a hand on a tablet cooling by the oven. And you, still awake, but drifting, let the rhythm of it all seep in. The marks in clay, the quiet of the night, the steady knowledge that, for now, everything is in its place. You keep walking until the sounds fade to nothing, until even your own footsteps seem to slow and soften, until the night feels like it could hold you in its palm without letting anything fall. The night stretches out, deep and unbroken, as if the whole city has wrapped itself in a blanket of silence. The stars above are steady now, their light falling softly over rooftops and empty lanes. Every doorway is closed, every lamp a faint ember behind reed mats. The air moves lazily, brushing against your skin in slow, even breaths. You imagine the storerooms, rows upon rows of clay tablets, each one cooled, settled, and resting. There's no rush in them now, no urgency. They've done their work for the day. The truth they carry will still be there in the morning, and the morning after that. The city's heart beats slower in the dark. You can almost hear it, distant. Footsteps fading, a shutter creaking once before settling still. Your own breath falls into the same rhythm, each inhale deeper, each exhale longer. The warmth of the day has gone, leaving only a soft, even coolness that wraps around you like a quiet assurance. You are safe here, for now. You picture the river's surface, dark and glassy, carrying nothing urgent, only the faint glimmer of starlight. The sound of it blends into everything else, a low, steady hum, like the last whisper of the market long after the stalls have closed. The weight of the day slips off your shoulders. What's left is light, easy to carry, the way the night carries. The city. You feel yourself sinking, not downward, but inward, into a space that holds you as gently as the clay holds its marks. Here, nothing is lost. Everything important has been written down, sealed, and put away. You don't have to keep it in your head. You can let it go. So you do. And the city, and the river, and the quiet keep watch for you until morning.